Thank you very much, Jayu, and thank you again for all the speakers, Rob Neighbour, Richard Dilks, Mary Marsh, and Stephen Barrett for their contributions. We now move on to our third and final session for this morning, the final session is focused around the theme of how might digital tools merge technical data with social knowledge to enable better planning for sustainable futures. So this session will be hosted by Dan Phillips, one of our colleagues. I'd like to also use the opportunity to thank Dan for putting so much effort into getting this symposium up and running. He's hosting the final session. Dan is a designer and engineer with 30 years experience in the development of innovative environments, products and services, studied at Imperial College and the University of Cambridge, and he's currently a studio leader in the Intelligent Mobility Design Center and a design strategist at Design Science. Dan, may I invite you to host the next session, please?
Yes, hi there. Let me just grab the presentation. I'm going to have to keep it short. So can we see anything? Yeah. So just looking at this session, we've got 4 speakers. Timea Nokta from Cambridge University is going to talk to us about community values and multiple ways of seeing what we mean by community. Professor Yudai Honma from the University of Tokyo is going to evangelize optimization and the way in which we might use technology to optimize the location of services and transport infrastructure. Mike Saunders is going to ask how we can use conversations to create better places. And Shira is going to end by looking at the value of service design in the development of platform businesses and the use of geospatial data. And hopefully they're all going to come together around issues of what do we mean by optimization and who are we listening to when we develop the future, when we think about the future, and what are digital tools doing to our relationships. So those are the things we're going to look at. I'm going to hand over to Timea to start us off. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to try to share my screen. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining. As Dan mentioned, my name is Timea Nokta. I'm a research associate at the Center for Smart Infrastructure and Construction. And the challenge that I wanted to pose today to the attendees of this symposium is about making the case for community values and the case for value pluralism in future digital cities. And I just wanted to start with giving a little bit of a background of where this idea comes from, actually, or why I wanted to talk about this subject on this symposium. So a few months ago, we conducted a project in Cambridge with a group of colleagues from different backgrounds, actually. And we were looking at this idea of digital twins and what might this technology or what can it do for cities, for urban planning, for the management of urban infrastructures, or also for creating better services on that depend on those infrastructures. So when we talk about digital twins in this context, essentially we mean a virtual replica of the city, including its buildings, its systems such as transport and energy. And what we wanted to do is we started a collaboration with the local governments around the Cambridge area. But actually the project involved a much broader set of stakeholders. So we wanted to understand, if we start thinking about this digital twin as a decision-making support tools for planning and management, then who are those stakeholders that that need to be involved in the development of such a tool? And what are their needs and requirements towards this tool? So what would be meaningful and useful for them to work with? And one of these groups of stakeholders was citizens and community groups, actually. And this was a research stream that became more and more important as we went along with the project. And we had a lot of very good conversations with citizens and the community groups and activists, trying to ask them about what their ideas and views were around these kinds of decision-making support tools in the urban context. And I wanted to just show a few of the responses that we got, which show a little bit how citizens in Cambridge think about these issues. So one activist said, not enough data of the right kind is being collected on a continuous basis to enable us not only to know what's going on or have a better idea about it, but also to feed into the transport models that do exist, to better understand what the future looks like and how it might be altered constructively by different interventions. So this was a view of a community group activist who has a background in data and modeling and a good technical understanding, and he valued participation and this participatory kind of decision making, and they wanted the tool to enable this sort of interaction between communities and local authorities and private sector partners. Another telling example was when one of our interviewees said, of course, bad data is worse than no data. So they are very conscious of the kind of issues that relate to data collection that then are used by digital tools, that it might actually, what we are measuring is not necessarily the good thing to measure, that it will give a skewed view of the city, and they were worried about this issue. Another activist told, again about modeling, is that he told, we don't have access to the model. At the end of the day, most things come down to judgment, and you can't challenge people's judgment. You can criticize it, but you can't challenge it. And this was very interesting to us because it kind of speaks to actually directly to the challenge that I posed, which is about making judgment on the basis of values and how that process feeds into decision making, either in a digital context or an analog context. And then this is again from a member of a community who essentially heard a councillor speaking about citizens this way. So he recalled the councillor saying, Cambridge is full of too many people with too much time on their hands and nothing better to do than get involved in what's not their business. And again, this is very telling about what the introduction or the interaction between citizens. There's a very active citizenry and very active citizen groups, and how local authorities make it feel it difficult to interact with these diverse groups. So what we learned from this project essentially was that different communities or groups that we conceptualized as communities had very different views and requirements when it came to the idea of city-scale digital twins of Cambridge. And again, the requirements were actually, or could be distilled as decision-making support tools must communicate with, in some way, communities and individuals. They have some role in mediating interests and conflicts arising from diverse values held by different citizen groups. And most importantly, or equally important, is that residents are actually not the only type of community to account for. There are other kinds of communities that need to be included. So this was the basis of why then we started to think about the idea of value pluralism. So value pluralism is essentially, it's a fancy expression, but really it's the idea that there can be incommensurable or conflicting moral views that are equally worthy of respect on the basis of different sets of values, actually. And why this is important is because community is actually not an abstract notion. Many types of groups can be considered communities. These communities then are heterogeneous and diverse, and they value different kinds of things and have different value systems. And so a classic example of value pluralism is the idea or the difference between the moral the moral system according to which a morally good behavior is, for example, the vision of a nun or a monk, which we tend to think about as a moral high ground, but equally we tend to think about the family, the mother and the father as a moral high ground. And these sets of values that underpin those ideals are actually, it's impossible to choose which one is better and why. They are not comparable, essentially. And so what value pluralism does or wants to do is sort of developing a sensible middle position between value absolutism, which says that there is one right answer, and value relativism, which says that there are no right answers whatsoever. So it, the view itself contains a recognition that many issues are complex and that there are many right answers, and then figuring out in a particular context which answer is the best or how to proceed actually involves debate and reflection. And when we were doing this project around digital twins, what we felt is that this is not a view that is currently present in the visions about digital cities and smart cities and digital decision-making support tools for urban planning and management. And so I distilled a few questions that I would be very much interested in discussing later on in the symposium. So questions such as how can we use ideas or designs inspired by value pluralism to better engage with communities in future digital cities? How can we identify specific use cases or processes where value pluralist propositions could make the most impact in future digital cities? So it's obvious that not everything needs such an approach, but there must be crucial points in which deploying such an approach actually will have a huge impact. And also, more concretely, are there any existing frameworks which could be utilized to start unpacking this issue or this problem? So one example is this idea of value-sensitive design of technologies, which is an interesting starting point. So yeah, that would be my presentation, and I look forward to discussing this with you. And just the one last very quick point is this slide that I got from another presentation by Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein, which I thought was very, very true. And this is, I think, the kind of outcome that we would want to avoid by introducing pluralist ideas to digital cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timea. Really interesting topics that I really think are important when we think about digital tools in general. Now we're handing over to Yudai, who's going to talk about optimization platforms in the context of Japan and Japanese transport infrastructure planning.
Okay, thank you, Dan. And I will start the share my screen. So thank you, Dan. And hello, everybody. And I am Yudai Honma from the Institute of Industrial Science at the University of Tokyo, Japan. So first of all, I would be very happy to receive this kind of great opportunities. And I really would like to express my gratitude to all members of the Royal College of Art Intelligent Mobility Design Centers. So my talk is about the locational optimizations. In first two themes, we talked about the social interactions and the mobility hubs, and furthermore, this theme is digital tools. I believe my talk will be one of the good examples for these keywords. So what I focus on here is the locational decision in the facility planning. So when we construct a new facilities, we have to consider a variety of things. Usually, there are many relevant stakeholders, and we also have to think about how to use the facility, I mean the activities. So it might be multifunctions or not, and of course, and for the successful planning, managing strategy is also very important. And it is not exaggeration to say that the location will make or break its future. So in Japan, there are more than 1,000 roadside stations throughout the island. So they are designated by the Ministry of Transport, MLIT. In these roadside stations, any travelers can park and rest with no cost. The facilities are also used by neighboring peoples because they provide a very attractive market. Moreover, people can receive a variety of social information like traveling information or sightseeing information at the desk. So we can regard them as a facility of multifunctions and a kind of the mobility hub, I think. So meanwhile, it should be pointed out that the local government in each region has to manage them in reality. What MLIT can do is just a certification, a kind of a license. So this fact implies that there are 3 types of stakeholders in the systems. That is the Ministry of Transport and local government and users. The most critical point here is that each viewpoint is different. Of course, ministry focuses on the fairness throughout the societies, but local government needs more sales perspective to earn the benefit or profit from the facilities. And meanwhile, facility users like neighboring residents or travelers put emphasis on their own efficiency. So therefore, it is natural that the best location is different for each stakeholder. We have to focus on the deviation between stakeholders like individuals versus groups or social aspect versus commercial aspect. So from these, okay. Sorry, I was checking the chat, sorry. So from these backgrounds, the Ministry of Transport have launched an official project focusing on the locational evaluation of roadside stations regarding multiple criteria. And this talk includes some of the results in the project. So as you know, this session theme is how digital tools merge technical data with social knowledge for sustainable futures. To show my opinion to the themes, I would like to focus on 2 points. So first, I would like to introduce the technique of integer programming as a digital tool. This mathematical technique contributes to the decision-making of the facility locations. I think this is a good example to integrate the technical data and convert to social knowledge. After that, I also would like to talk about how this digital tool can stabilize the deviation between stakeholders. In my opinion, this optimization tool is not to decide something, but rather to understand the characteristics of whole system or our society. So first, let me explain what the integer programming is. So integer programming is one of the methods for mathematical optimizations. It decides the optimal integer, usually 0 or 1 binary variables. Let me show you an example. So this is a map of the Greater Tokyo region with 738 candidate sites of roadside stations. And what we want to decide here is to pick up the 175 locations from them, like the right side. So this procedure is equivalent to allocate the 0 or 1 value to each candidate site. So if the site is 1, so the site is 1 if the station is located and 0 otherwise. So it's a kind of the decision making, and definitely this is the digital tool. So the solution procedure is not so easy as you imagine. Actually, there are tremendous possibilities for this decision making, but the latest software for integer programming solves precisely the best solution in a few minutes. Sorry. So in the project, we have calculated the optimal location based on the many geographical information data, such as a very, very detailed data roadmap and real population distributions and real flow data and so on. So this right side figure indicates the traveling times in the computers. So now some people may suspect how to define the optimality. And actually, I completely agree with you. The optimal is deeply depend on the assumptions. Here are some examples. The left figure is to use stations as disaster prevention bases. So this is the future scenario proposed by MLITs. And in this case, we try to maximize the coverage of people. And actually, we calculate the optimal location to maximize the number of neighboring residents who can access within 30 minutes. On the other hand, the middle one and the right figures were focusing on the efficiency in our ordinary life. Okay. I have 2 minutes left, so ordinary life. So in the center scenario, we focus on the neighboring residents and minimize the average access time to the stations. Meanwhile, in the right scenario, we focus on the traveler side and minimize the average returning time on the way to some other destinations. So I believe that every assumption seems appropriate, but at the same time, we have the definitely several optimal locations. Then which one should we choose? If we place importance on the coverage, then both access time and returning time become worse, as I showed in left side, and similar discussions for the other 2 scenarios. So I would like to say that this kind of single objective function is more fragile. So hopefully, in the field of the optimization, there is a technique to solve multi-objective optimizations. And this is one example of solving it. Now we can confirm that each objective value is more balanced. And it is the reason I said we can use optimal location or integer programming as a stabilizer. So it is true that each value becomes slightly worse than single ones, but I think it is acceptable. As you see, integer programming could be a stabilizer of different perspectives. Furthermore, to understand how each criterion would react will be an important knowledge or intelligence for our society. So finally, I briefly would like to focus on the deviation between the social aspect and the commercial aspect. So I mentioned that local government focus on the profit side. So the current situation is a kind of the commercial aspect. So here, let me introduce the one idea as another stabilizer. The strategy is quite simple. So just construct a few additional new facilities from a social viewpoint. We can confirm that each objective value is improved, and this strategy must be feasible and stabilize the social situations. So let me conclude my talk. In my talk, I introduced the integer programming to analyze the optimal locations. I think this digital tool has a huge potential to be a stabilizer of deviation between different perspectives, viewpoints, and stakeholders. So I am an engineering researcher, and I clearly understand that optimization is not magic. It is just a tool, nothing more or nothing less. So, but I believe that if we have a good command of this tool, it would be a great intelligence to merge technical data for the sustainable futures. So thank you for listening. And now I'll hand back to Dan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yudai. It's a challenging talk for designers to listen to understand, you know, the relationship between the things that we measure and the things that we manage, and how digital tools help this. Very interesting to take this further. And just to say, I think because of the timing, we're going to keep questions at the end short, and we will take more questions in the afternoon session. So please come and join us then. The next speaker is Mike Saunders from Commonplace. He has built an amazing platform to help communities have conversations about their public realm, and he's going to talk more about the desire, the aim of increasing the value of that voice and making that voice heard. So over to Mike.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everybody. Let me share my screen. Okay. So as Dan said, I'm CEO of Commonplace, and for those of you who don't know, Commonplace is a digital engagement platform for places, and our focus is really on connecting people to places they live or work, to accelerate positive change. So whether you call them smart cities or intelligent places, there has been a vision of smart places, if you like, which are run by algorithms and create a place that's efficient and is really like a machine. It senses, it processes, it minimizes, it integrates, but often it doesn't feel. And at Commonplace, as many of the rest of you have, we have an alternative vision, and it's one of a digitally enabled place that catalyzes conversations between people. And it's these conversations that create the intelligence. Digital has a really interesting role to play here, I think, not as a solution, but if you like, as a tonic. It's part of the solution. And there are three observations I'd like to share with you, which are all things that underpin the Commonplace philosophy. Firstly, the idea of embracing open. By being completely open with the way that engagement works with the public, there's an opportunity to generate trust in a way that's never really been seen before. It's why so many people have commented on Lewisham's route suggester that you see here. Our heat maps are very, very simple. As a user, you drop a pin on the map and you say what you feel about the place and how it can be improved. And through this openness, we create a shared collective understanding of needs. And with that as a basis, we can accelerate collaboration and accelerate improvements to places. So I believe that the power of data is as much in embracing the subjectivity as about collecting objective observations. I've mentioned a couple of times the idea of shared understanding being created from all this data. And this collective view, based on all the data that's being collected, is shared in the literal sense, in that so many people have contributed individually to creating this collective view. It can be shown as infographics, as you see here. Data, I think, I see if it is a bit like a lubricant for the intelligence. It's very much not the machine that runs it. And digital enables this sentiment of the community to be captured and analysed in real time and can be read directly from the dashboard on our platform. Because the comments are tagged, there's much less manual analysis to do, so it's much easier to make sense of what's being said. I'm going to show you a few examples. I'm particularly going to focus on some of the work that we've been doing in the last couple of months with customers who've been using Commonplace to respond to COVID-19 challenges. So we've been working with Leeds City Council in the UK for a couple of years. And like many of our customers, they've recently been focusing on this COVID-19 recovery. A huge number of people had already participated in a citywide conversation over a couple of years. And you see some of the tools that we have here. So in the top right-hand corner, there's a before and after view, which allows you to swipe between what's currently seen in a location and what's being proposed in the future. In the last couple of months, Leeds have launched their COVID-19 social distancing, and in less than a month, they had 20,000 contributions from the public about their proposals for different road uses. And they've since announced 100 kilometres of new cycle paths to be delivered in the city as a result or follow on from this engagement. Catford in South East London, different kind of example, town centre that has for some time needed some regeneration. This conversation has been going on for over 2.5 years and is still going. The COVID-19 engagements that we're having conversations around are urgent and essential, but with the right approach, they can turn into long-term, vibrant conversations. And in Catford, the shared understanding of needs was illustrated in some beautiful infographics that you can see there in the top right-hand corner, produced by our partners, Filigree Communications. So a necessity of making this sentiment approach work, I think, is that the sentiment people express has to be genuine, not invoked or encouraged by somebody else. And this requires something that's often quite hard to achieve, particularly in public engagement, which is trust. As you can see from those bubbles at the bottom, Grosvenor published some research last year that showed how difficult or how much of a gap there is. Only 2% of the public trust local government, only 8% trust developers when it comes to the built environment. So let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. Technology is fantastic at being open with information. It's one of the things it does best. What do we mean by open? Well, simply that people can read each other's comments. It creates a social proof, which is a massive driver for digital engagement. It's essentially how social media works. By demonstrating that lots of other people are using it, you can create a de facto reason for others to do it as well. And this allows you to engage outside of the bubble or the echo chamber that's often inherent to both traditional and neighbourhood engagement, and indeed social media itself. And it creates a constructive conversation that has collective weight. Greater Manchester in northern England is using Commonplace as part of its COVID recovery, which is very exciting for us. They're understanding how social distancing can work alongside encouraging more cycling and walking as we come out of lockdown. It's another example of how using digital to gather a large amount of data sets up a previously unseen conversation. We've had over 10,000 contributions in just a few weeks. And this level of engagement is driven in at least part by the openness, which has produced a groundswell of interest and of data. And this is another slightly different example that I'm very proud of. This was used by Liverpool City region slightly earlier in the COVID crisis, where they were trying to work out what problems key workers were having in getting to work. And this provided them real-time data in a very, very short time span, which they were able to respond to immediately. So digital has a role to play in helping bring people on a journey. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes people start from a position of resistance. But when listened to and feeling that they're participating, they can become very quickly constructive collaborators. This is another example, having worked with Sustrans in Scotland. This is an example in Perth, which is one of my favourites. Sustrans worked with the community to prioritise spaces and routes for active travel, and then created a set of ground-up inspired designs, which have created huge interest and some very innovative thinking and delivery. And a final example is Waltham Forest, where Commonplace was used to generate participation on a massive scale, which has helped them to speed approvals, to defend judicial reviews, and ultimately to deliver the scheme more quickly, which has been shown to increase the air quality by such an extent from a King's College piece of research that 42,000 years of human life will be saved in the borough just as a result of the improvements to cycling and walking in the borough. And then looking forward, we're very interested and keen to embrace different ways of describing and making real changes to environment. And this is an example where we've collaborated and integrated a platform called View City with Commonplace, so you can see a live 3D environment, and not only the buildings that are currently there, but the buildings in blue and yellow that you see are in fact buildings that have been consented but not yet built, or in the process of being built. So to summarise, I think digital intelligence is about embracing the subjective. I think we're starting to think a lot about the future. The last few months has provided a tremendous opportunity that's about so much more than just digitising what has previously happened. And the opportunity that exists is to use the strengths of digital to build a newfound energy and interest in community that's that can really help to move the dial on local democratisation of places in planning. And we believe that one of the most important aspects is to connect people to the places that they live or work by joining up individual conversations into something that's much more meaningful and much more connected for them. So I think this is a huge opportunity for all of us, and I think it's one that could have tremendous impact on the way that local communities engage in the future. And it's a delight to be part of this conversation. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks very much. Dan, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I've always been a fan of your platform and the work that you're doing. I think, you know, how we take it forward and how we dig into people's philosophical outlook, not just their immediate feelings, could be very, very powerful. So look forward to talking about that later. We're now going to go to our last speaker, who's one of the Royal College's recent PhD students, Dr. Shira Park. I've known Shira for a while. She's worked very, very hard developing her knowledge and her understanding both of service design and of the platform businesses that services often support. And she's going to talk about both those things from the perspective of geospatial data. So over to you, Shira.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to share my slide now. Hi, everyone. I'm Shira. Really nice to meeting you all. And so in this sessions, we'll talk about the value of social and geospatial data in platform-based businesses. And I will mainly touch the questions around how might we better utilize the social and geospatial data that benefit us, and how might we stimulate the participation in the service ecosystems. So before just start, just briefly introduce myself. I'm associate lecturer at Loughborough University. As Dan introduced, recently completed my PhD in service design at RCA. And my research, I have intensively investigated in digital mapping platform from service ecosystem perspective, especially in relation to the mobility service. I particularly have been focusing on how the service opportunities can be developed in a digital platform and services, and explore how the service design can create a value in this space. So going forward, there are lots of attention around the Industry 4.0 and data, and these data has been driven by use of IoT and immersive technologies and consumer-based applications that create the various type of geospatial data. And many other intelligent services and the platforms create that enhance the customer experiences. And these are mainly geospatial data that created from the both above and below the ground. And these are also creating the lots of the expectation in terms of creating new form of the value in both private and the public sectors. So getting into the details, geospatial data that are available as resources, there are certain types of geospatial data which describe about the location and people. They are automatically generated in low data formats, and much of this data comes from using 2 or more layers of them. And combining the multiple data set help us to perform more complex analysis. It means it helps us to explore the different aspects of the built environments as well as people's activities. For example, we can use transport layers to build a smart navigation for commuter to move across the city, and to understand the cause and effect of the climate changes, or the policymaker to make a right decision on infrastructure plannings or housing or environmental issues, and so on. Within these layers, the most valuable assets comes from top layers that describe the people's socio-cultural activities and the social attribution and their social attributions in relation to the locations. Because it comes from, containing the personal data, such as use of social media, their point of interest, and personal fitness, or the health data that associate with the GPS-enabled smartphones and devices. It also captures information about people's life patterns and their interests, where they go, what they do, how long they stay through the interaction with the given service and systems in a city. In the below ground, this geospatial data is backed and then comes from the range of sources with the different level of qualities. It also made available at the different level of granularities, depending on the organizations who generates, holds, and use the geospatial data sets. These geospatial data can also be classified either closed, shared, paid, or opened, whether the data comes from commercial sectors or public sectors or crowdsourcing. These data is also collected, stored, and managed by different organizations with different level of access. While these are available in a various form of access, the most valuable data and insights actually comes from the commercial organizations, which they are not actually open to the public, but they are only available within the organizations. For example, the data describe my previous travel histories, payments, or search histories, which can be also used for better understand on the how people behave or their movement and their point of interest. And this social and the geospatial data can also categorized as 4 different types of platform-based business and services. First one in the left corner, making the geospatial data usable for all. Their service increase the data specifications and its accuracies and covers such as the installing the sensors in a city, scanning the building heights, trees and land use and so on. So they make a data as a service. And right below the governments and infrastructure, these type of organizations are mainly government agencies who make a data accessible for all. So they do not particularly generate the revenue by opening data. However, for example, TfL, the opening the data is actually creating the value for SMEs, also helps the TfL themselves, because the TfL let the third party to create the transport related service and products that works for their own customers, as well as stimulate the economic values. In the right side, data visualizations, they take the benefits by representing data more sensible, so that other organizations who use their service can understand the pattern of data, also able to get insight from data in a better way. And below the last one, these type of startups, they use data as open data as a free resources and make a data more valuable for the people. They have a strong value propositions and solve the very complex problem of the cities. And they also combine the geospatial data with the other range of the open, shared, closed data, so they can offer better service for the users. And each of them, each of the organization has the opportunities and challenges. For example, the geospatial data brokerage, they run their service as a license and subscription models, but it requires a higher level of CapEx management, also rely on the technologies. And then sometimes it's very difficult to get into the markets without the technologies. So for TfL case, by opening data, it helps other SMEs to build applications like the city mappers. So other third parties can help the TfL's customer and stimulate the data ecosystems. And the data visualization, they can bring the useful and meaningful insight from data that could bring the opportunities, but the combining with the multiple data source, the finding data friction point could be quite challenging in order to represent, also extract useful insights or the stories within the data. So in terms of customer-facing applications, the open data and government data is highly valuable as a free resources. SME can create a new data set which can be close to their organizations, which means more customers use their service. The application, the organization who developed the application can also be able to store their service usage data. They also able to track, build more the valuable data sets by themselves. So each organization involved in this the service ecosystems has a specific relationship with the other the players. They exchange, share data. Also, they have a mutual data exchange and benefits amongst the different partners, collaborator under their own service ecosystem, how they create their services. So as you can see here, there are 4 types of the organization who are using geospatial data. and they run their ecosystem service system completely different way, and they also has different a completely distinguished rule of the sustaining their services and businesses. So putting together, especially in terms of transportations, each service has a different collaborator and their own interaction network on how to create their service and what to share with others. So more participants into this service ecosystem, participants could create a better or create greater value and maximize the resources of technologies, data, knowledge, and so on. So how we can increase the participation into these ecosystems and create the new service? I suggest there are two different ways of the creating service and products. As you can see from bottom to top directions, it is very much like supply chains, from data capacity to its accuracy and data representation and data cleansings, and government data, and then the infrastructures plays a fundamental role in this area. Also, service opportunities mostly driven by technology specifications and the feasibilities. On the other side, from top to bottoms, this direction can focus on the peoples and the problem that needs to be addressed. So these two approaches are significantly differ from the one to another. So from the design's perspective, it's more important to find the people's problem, users' problem, find the problem that exists, and think about also consider the users or stakeholders' needs, what kind of platforms or technologies or geospatial data can support to solve the problem that identified. So we may start to consider two different approaches with these other questions, series of questions, and we can talk more on these afternoon sessions to talk about these two different approaches. Thank you. That's it.
Hi, should we have a quick get together with all the sessions? Can I just say to everyone, I feel like the talks, you know, you could almost have a 1 hour session on each of those talks. So I think you've all done very well to try and compress them into such a you know, a small time. And I hope you've all found them valuable. One of the things that comes out of this, well, a few questions come out from my perspective, and the first is, can digital tools actually create a real sense of place? Do they have that capacity in them? Do they actually, do the programmers who are involved in developing, do the designers involved in developing, do the marketeers involved in developing them really understand the places that they're trying to serve? So that's really to Maya. Yeah,
it's a good question. I think from my own personal experience in working on one of these tools, there are a lot of, or for at least for us, there were a lot of surprises. And yeah, I think it's not only even the question of whether we know the place enough, or can a particular person or a group know the place enough to provide a realistic representation. It's more like that realistic representation looks slightly different to everyone, actually. And I think what I was trying to allude to in my talk as well is that it's a key process of how those different interpretations of the place are discussed among different people and different groups. So I think that what's for me, what is missing a little bit is how can digital tools spark those kinds of debates rather than trying to simplify or reduce them to a particular solution. So I answered to your question with another one. Sorry about that.
No, that's fair enough. And Uday, in the context of things like COVID-19, inequality, the climate and ecological crisis, what are we optimizing for You know, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And do you, you know, as you've said in your talk, the technology is just a tool. Somebody has to make a decision, but if you're not measuring the right things, perhaps, you know, we're not actually providing the right answers.
Actually, about COVID-19, I would like to say one thing. So in the field of locational analysis, we frequently consider the capacity or congestion of the facilities. And actually, by considering such kind of measures, we update the deviations, debate between the stakeholders. And also in the location, in the modeling, we have another variables which correspond to the people and the location. So I mean, we are simultaneously solving the allocation between the people and the facilities. And here it's also another important data to solve such kind of crisis. So, and actually, as a final questions, and I think it's quite difficult to how we can conclude or convergence, get the convergence summary from such kind of mathematical measures. But I think if we use such kind of digital tools, it is a good way to understand how the whole system reacts as an answer of our activities. So understanding the reaction of the society, and it is a good way to develop our discussions. Is it become the answer to your questions?
It's a start of an answer, but you know, the number of times that I hear people talking about artificial intelligence as the solution to all of our problems, you know, it seems to be in every paper, but in reality, they don't seem to be solving the real underlying problems that we face. I've only got time for one more question before we end, and I'm going to ask Mike, whose voices are we actually listening to? And what value are you giving to excluded voices? How are you prioritizing the excluded voices rather than taking the majority perspective?
Good question. So I think, I mean, we take a slightly different approach to a normal sampled approach, which if you're trying to get a representative sample of the population is the traditional approach. What we tend to do is to encourage as much engagement as possible, but we collect information about who's engaging as they engage, so we can then identify where there are gaps in the demography of the people who've responded. And normally the benchmark that we will compare the sample that we have against is the ONS data for that area. So the thing that we're trying to get to is a representative sample of the community that's in that area. In traditional kind of conversations around urban planning, most of the population are excluded. It tends to be kind of older white men as a stereotype, but you know, those tend to be people who are very much overrepresented, and everybody else is underrepresented. But within that, of course, there are barriers around people who don't have access to digital technology. And actually, partly in response to your previous question, I think one of the things we're really clear about is that digital tools on their own are very difficult to get a complete sense of place, and actually they should always be part of a broader set of conversations which have to include face-to-face conversations. And in some cases, you won't get a particular group of people in the community responding digitally, and so you have to physically go to them and have that conversation, and that will, I think, will continue to be a really important part of doing this. And then the question is, how do you collect information from them in a way that you can use it alongside information that you've collected digitally? So I think it's an ecology of conversations that need to be had in order to make sure that everybody is included, and that's tremendously important. And developing tools that can support that entire ecology, I think, is what we should be doing.
Yeah, great. Shira, I haven't got time to include you in this Q&A session, but we're going to all have time in the afternoon to go more deeply into your different projects and identify opportunities for deeper design research, and that would be wonderful. And we do hope that participants will join us. I'm going to hand back to Cyril just to close this first session, and thank you all very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you to all the speakers in the final session. For me, it's been a really fascinating morning, and I hope you all really enjoyed all the different sessions. I think we covered a lot of ground in the context of designing our future intelligent cities. And unfortunately, we didn't have the time to perhaps dive into some of the additional questions in more detail. But luckily, we do have the afternoon workshops planned. And hopefully you all have received the links via the Q&A or the chat box to actually sign up on the Google Documents for the 3 workshops this afternoon. So we will have 3 workshops. Each workshops, they will run in parallel, and each workshop will focus on one of the themes that we've been discussing this morning. So we are all hoping to see you there this afternoon. And it just really leaves me to thanks to all the hosts, all the speakers, all the people participating in the audience, and last but not least, also the organizer committee, which have done a tremendous effort in making this symposium happen. Many thanks again to all of you. So with that, and being aware of that we're slightly overrun in terms of time, I would like to thank you all again. I hope you have a great lunch, and we all hope to see you back this afternoon. If not this afternoon, there is a final session also on the Wednesday next week, where we actually will be communicating the main insights of the symposium. And so if you're not able to make this afternoon session, we definitely hope to see you next Wednesday. So with that, I'd like to leave you and hope to see you this afternoon. Thank you. Bye.